Ai ke aloha ia kākou pakai a Paulo ea o wau o Tangaro aia wau ke kauhale o Hawaii Community College ma waia ke I Hilo e mea ka ana no ho'i ke ia wahi o ka Zoom me ko kākou wahi hoa hanau o Numangatini, Mackenzie, and malalo o ke ia o Mōkaulele. I want to say aloha to everyone for joining us. Our time is 4 o'clock, and we are excited because this is the first time Mōkaulele, the series Indigenous Arts for Indigenous Leadership, has we have our Pacific cousin with us. So it's like yay! So he's gonna be the first of a number, I suspect. But Numa, I want to say thank you for joining us. Before we let Numa take it away with his story, I just want to talk to you a little bit about the purpose of Mōkaulele. Mōkaulele is to indigenize the process by which some of our students and the workers within the university system of Hawaii really maximize their potential, either as an employee or as a student. And when we say indigenize the university system, that's exactly what we're doing. It's not a hidden agenda. It's within the strategic imperatives of the university system. It's called Hawaii Papokeao, to transform into a system of higher education to better serve our indigenous communities. And because Hawaii, the University of Hawaii is service not only to Hawaiians, but to many other indigenous and underrepresented communities, there's no better time to address equity in higher education. And we do so through many ways, one of which is Mōkaulele, listening to the story of the artist and allowing that story of the artist to reflect our own story. And so we do have images of Numa's work that he would like to share with you, but frontline of it is really his story. Too often we celebrate the artists for their work, their accomplishments, their finished product, and that's a great thing, and we'll continue to do that. But Mōkaulele gives an opportunity to understand the story behind the art, the human being behind this title we call the artist. So without further ado, Numa, Auhea Oi, where are you? Aloha.
Kia orana. Tongike. Ko Numangatini tōku ingoa, ko Mangaio mai au, e Palmerston, e Aitutaki, e Ngāti Pākehā, my papa. So yeah, I'm lucky enough to come to ancestrally come from the islands of Mangaia, but my life has taken me all over the place, and I was actually born in Canada and raised a bit in Canada and America, and then eventually making my way back to my island with my family. And then I met my Māori princess, and she brought me to Aotearoa, New Zealand, where I live now. And we're practicing artists. Quite proud to write that. When I fill out the passport form, what's your job? Artist. Yep. Boom. Never thought I'd be able to write that.
The beauty of what you just described is your migration canoe has not stopped. It's continuing to go. And so we can all relate to that because we all come from canoes. So Numa, before we jump into your childhood, because that's where all of this, the punana manu, the nest of the bird, is where what we do as adults, they get formed in that nest. But before we even get there, can you share with us, can you describe what kind of artist, the word artist is also limiting. It only works in some of our brains. And, so can you please describe it in your words? What is it that you do?
Oh, I would say that I'm a mark maker and, part of facilitating, connecting and place and a good worker. our people, our servers, we service our communities and stuff like that. And that's something that I've learned through my journey, is that if you're a good worker, people always want you around. You always can, you always have value if you're useful, and so I'm definitely proud to say that, because I've had the ability to be in a lot of spaces, and that's because I can listen and I can do. And if I can't, then I'll learn to do and keep listening. So, and the idea of an artist also, because they talk about our, we're really linked to our artifacts and stuff like that. And they talk about all the artists but actually all of our things that are in implements that are in museums, they weren't made to be art, they were meant to be a useful thing to connect to either the environment, the atua, or to do a job that linked, but it was just so creatively done. The title artist is funny to me, but I'm also proud to wear it.
Yeah, in Hawaii, we have this new word, pahiona. They use it to just generally, try to match the understanding of the Eurocentric definition of artists, but even that is limiting. So, only because they're all functional tools, or they're functional ritual items, and the aesthetics, especially the more related they are, the more the function is related to religion or spirituality, and there's always the aesthetics that has to accompany it, because the aesthetic in itself is a prayer. It opens up a connection. Even in chanting, we're trained for many years to have the most aesthetic voice, because the gods are most likely to listen to the aesthetic voice. So,
they don't want to hear the bad song. They want to hear the good one,
Yeah. So we haven't found the right word yet. We haven't given birth to the word that, because it's not the way we're trying to force fit something. So maybe in the future, our children will find something that we can agree to that really reflects how we feel when we create these functional aesthetic pieces. Okay, getting that out of the way. Numa, so what you're doing now, has a lot, we believe how we stand today, how we sit today, how we sleep, how we dream, has a lot to do with how we were conceived, nurtured within that punana, within that nest of however we define home. One time home was an extended family, and then for some people it's a nuclear family, and for some people home is a social family. So home is defined differently in 2021. But in your definition of home, what went on or did not go on that pointed you into this direction of the arts?
I think it's probably, some of the first time I felt that I can remember praise for drawing, for doing, making little drawings for that, and just really feeling loved up by my family, and they're so proud of my little drawings and things like that. So really, I always think back to those times. I used to draw planes and helicopters and stuff like that, and these are so good, and but also in our home, art was a big part of our home. My parents were eclectic. They were collectors of art, all kinds. They weren't picky. And we had kind of like an island home, but we also had a lot of other things in the house from my parents' adventures. They traveled a lot before I was born. My dad worked in oil and gas, and that's kind of dictated where I lived and where we lived before that. So it was reflected in the house. We had stuff from Bolivia, and we had stuff from Spain and Africa, and that's because those were the places that my parents went to do that, to follow that kind of work that my father did. So it was definitely nurtured. Like, it was a good environment for me to be in, because we did, all of our stuff compared to everyone else's houses seemed a little, I wouldn't want to say boring, but just very Eurocentric. Sterile, nothing unique. Maybe the pictures came from IKEA, or or they were sports posters or things like that, and that was their world, but mine wasn't that at all. And
So
it took
I
me a
like
long
that.
time to realize that.
I like that you described that art was sort of the dialect of your home, and
Mm,
it wasn't just limited to just one geography of art, but sort of global, very reflective. And that it was probably eclectic. You use the word eclectic to describe your parents, so I assume that their home was quite eclectic.
yeah.
Um, but also the fact that when you did draw, people were there to praise and to support and to encourage. And and many of us, we're in the university system. If I can just segue this into the university world, many of us, it's just the mere opposite. The idea of coming to the university, and many of our people, there's many of our students till today, they're the first time members coming to the university. They're the first time in their family, they're the first one in the family getting really this experience. And so oftentimes the family do not know how to support that. When you do good at the imu, when you can make the umu really good, everybody's there to support you. When you can catch the fish, everybody's there to support you. Like, oh yeah, they'll sing your song. If you can dance hula, I mean, they'll make sure you perform even at funerals. I mean, even for the dead, they'll make sure you dance or something. However, whenever we step into something that's unfamiliar to the family, that support doesn't come. Not in the
Mm,
same way. Oftentimes it leaves the student unsupported. And we do know that going through a rites of passage has to have a huge support from the family. So what can we do with our families? Well, the families are the families and they're created to be families, but what we can do with our children, we can't really do nothing with our parents. They
no,
did what they
their
did.
path is laid. We're just following behind them.
We have an opportunity to work with our students, with our kids,
Mm,
to encourage them. And if and as you were encouraging the arts, perhaps we want to grow a stronger student. That has to start from home, not necessarily when the student enters school.
mhm.
Maybe that
Yeah.
support does come if we were to parallel your story.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that that I was off to a good start, but as soon as I started getting older, that's no one's gonna go, man, I wish my child grows up to be an artist. No, they want the lawyer, the doctor, all those other things, accountant, like, and I've heard many, and especially even famous artists that they went and did the thing that their parents told them to do. They got the paper, all that kind of stuff, and then they reverted back to their original goal of being an artist. And for me, I think it's the art was the healing thing for me.
Yeah.
I was the last of my family. All my brothers and sisters flew out, and I was there last. And so I found my family through the arts, and it was that went a total different path. I was following in the footsteps of my brother in hip hop culture, and I got into graffiti, and I was trying to break dance. And this was the resurgence in the 90s after it faded in the 80s, and it started coming back in the 90s with dance music and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
that was my work. And I found that support there. It wasn't there at all from my parents at that time, but that's partially my fault too. But they didn't see that as that avenue. I won
Then
I won the right to a graffiti competition when they were just starting back at that time, and I was so proud of it and telling my parents, and oh, I'd like to make clothing and all this, and that just all got kiboshed, and it also as that was going up, the grades were going the other way.
so that's one of the things we want to ask our students when they come in, because we come from a collective community, and what our parents think, what our grandparents think, what the elders in the community think, they matter. They matter in our lives. We don't live for ourselves only. But how do we? Many of us are not cut out to be lawyers or doctors or whatever. I couldn't. Oh, I'm a vegetarian today because I can't kill pig. My families are hunters, and I'm the eldest son. What a failure. The eldest son is only a hula dancer. It wasn't valued for an eldest boy. That practice of a hula dancer was not. It shouldn't be a choice for the eldest
Right,
son.
right.
And so when our students come in, when we ask them, well, what's your big story? because your little story means you might have to get the degree, you might have to, and sometimes because your parents never went to school, you going to school is them going to school. So oftentimes they project their needs, their personal needs on the child.
And
And
societal, I would say.
yeah, and
Society,
then
that's dictating to all of us what, you know, nobody wants the artist, but they do want the lawyer. The lawyer is what looks good to all of society. So they want that.
you said something that it was, you gravitated to art because it was healing. And
Mm.
so that's one of the concerns, that's one of the variables that plays in when we help our students come to the university system. One, what is your big story? What is your small story? And where do they intersect? But one of those stories have to speak to healing, you know, and because we don't want to put all that effort into becoming the doctor, and it just makes you the worst human being ever. And we know that that exists. People they live the story of another, and they find themselves unfulfilled and quite sick, and they need to heal. So can we talk about, you did mention a little bit about you're a child. Yeah, oh, you're good. That's a great drawing and all that. And you reach a certain age, it's like, okay, we should be talking about your future,
Mm.
because maybe art is nice as if you're a child, or it's nice to collect, but can you really raise your family on art, or what those concerns parents have? So can you speak to us, at what point did you actually commit? You began to realize this is the route you're going to go. How old were you?
Oh, gee. Uh, Probably 15, 16. It was like this is the only space I feel good in, and so it was, no matter what, that was going to be the space that I was going to hold. And so, and I was backed by my community, which was all my friends, and I was doing that, and I was totally kind of at that time separating from my family in a sense, because I was growing in this direction, and they were working hard and keeping the house and working on their dreams, and I was focusing on mine. And growing up in Canada, I didn't have a Pacific Island community. We need like a Tongan family, a Fijian, and that was it, because they don't, not many islanders come to Canada where we were. I found out later they were all on the coast out of Vancouver. So, I only knew a bit of that world, from growing up. And I did visit. We did go back to the islands every few years. My parents had taken. I was baptized. I had my hair cutting, which is traditional ceremony in the Cook Islands. I had those things. I knew I was Cook Islands, but it wasn't. And like most people, it's not the dominant culture. So you're just trying to fit into the dominant culture. What was drawing me to that kind of hip hop dance scene was that we were all those weird, not dominant culture people. We were Asian, we were Black, we were Hispanic, we were all those people. But when we came together, we were family. And it was the family that because we didn't have our own communities amongst our, or they weren't strong. When we came together as that, then we were a strong community, and that allowed us to be ourselves and come out of our shells and all that kind of stuff.
I introduced you to Mōkaulele London earlier. One of the things that she was a group member in the development was these communities. How do you create a community within, uh, you know, within the university system? A community for people like us, a community that didn't see themselves in the instructorship or the administration of the university. They saw, other kinds of people, but they didn't see themselves. And so, and then knowing that their families couldn't support them because their families never journeyed in academia.
Mm.
So one of the things, but knowing that our people have a need for community, and even if it's not identical community, close is good enough.
Yeah.
And so even if you don't have a Mangaya, the Tokelau cousin, the Fijian cousin, everybody begins to identify and hold on to each other because we're desperate for community. And but we do know that when those communities, those little hubs of communities were built in academia, people began to succeed. Hawaiians began to succeed better. Samoans who come from strong communities, when they come into a university system and there is a community of Samoans there, they have family, they have support, they have somebody that can understand them. And everybody has a little take on understanding. So, sometimes you need to have people, quite close to who you are. So that role of community, you use the word healing. Why do you use that word healing?
Going through all that time, my family was being pulled apart. I wasn't connected to them. They weren't connected to me. We were all working they were working towards their goal of retirement. And I was in my world and I wasn't connected to them on that level. And I think that's partly to do with growing up. And like I said, that healing space is because it's that place of comfort where you can make and do, and people see it, and you get that praise, and everybody needs that some way or another. It might be in something they say or do or make. And so that was, I would feel that within that community. So that was a big part. That healing, is not being disconnected and really severing myself from my family through my own actions and through theirs, but mostly my own. And because I wasn't going there working towards retirement. That's not my direction at that time, And so I really think it's about that. And then also, as my story continues, I'd gotten into another art form, and that was a Brazilian art form called capoeira. And I did that. And then I was doing that, and I was leaving my hip hop kind of party culture behind, because it allowed me to be active and out and seen and stuff like that, but not necessarily in the party space, which I was growing out of. It was like, okay, can't just keep partying every weekend,
So how did capoeira advance you to, what was its contribution to who you are today? What did we identify these practices, but if I begin to look at those practices as people, like an uncle, you go to this uncle, whether you want to go to the uncle or not, and the uncle leaves you with some kind of skill or some kind of experience that you can turn into skill. Or you go to an auntie, and she might be a loving one, and you have great attention from her, and then you have this witch auntie down the village, and she just is your nightmare, but yet you're able to take the nightmare and make it work for you. What did capoeira teach you about you?
What I saw, the links between hip hop and capoeira, was the difference was 400 years. That was the difference to me. I was like, so the musicians, the music, it all went into the boombox, but it was still based on the circle. It still had that African roots, all that kind of stuff. And I was really like mesmerized, and I was totally into it. And then I'd taken my parents, 9/11 happened, and my parents were really fearful for me, as I was still living in Canada, and they'd moved back to the Cook Islands, and they said, why don't you come down and spend a year with us and see how it goes? And, we're really worried, the world situation. So I went home for that year. And I had every time before then was like, I went as a child. I went as, it was a holiday, it was just an extended holiday. This was the first time I'd gone to live. One time before that, so I had an idea, but I kind of had the postcard in my head. I was going home, the postcard, because I was working, I was making good money, and I was living the life that I wanted to live. And I thought, yeah, I can just do that there. I'll just go down there and I'll work. And I didn't think about how much less money they make down there and how much more expensive that world was. And so I went down there and I thrashed and crashed. And, by the end of that year, I could walk leaving with my head up, but I was keen to go back to Canada. But I had all these amazing experiences connecting to people and to the island in my own way as an adult, young adult. And, and I'd learned about voyaging and total and tattooing and all that kind of stuff. And I'd gotten my first piece, my first total from Cook Islander, and that was like the real like, wow, this is my identity. And I waited till the end of that year. I asked my parents even, which they were very reluctant, but said, yeah, if this is what you feel, you know, and I'd even the tattooist wanted to put it on my forearm, and I was like, I'm not up for that. And I asked him to put it on my leg because I didn't want it to be this showpiece. I wanted it to be, it was for me, it was my link. And but it had a massive thing on me, and but when I went home, it really got me into wondering, and the voyaging stuff was like, okay, I'm gonna go home and read about this. So I went to the library and I started looking up books on our artifacts and the things that were taken from us, and not understanding that, but reading it through the papa eyes, and just for them to come into our territories was like outer space for them, and we were the aliens, and we mastered our environment. But just reading it through that and just being blown away by how, like, at that time they were looking at it like space. It was like unknown. They didn't know where they were going. They really didn't know where they were going, and got a lot of help, and were quite surprised on what they found. And so that really was just stirring me up. And then my artwork was reflecting that. I was still doing a bit of stuff in the street. I was still doing stickers and tagging and painting a bit, and but wasn't, you know, I wasn't really into the graffiti game anymore because there was just too much fighting in that space, and that really wasn't what it was about. I do like public art, but I didn't like the scene because it was getting like violent where I was from. And I'm sure a lot of other people that are in that world totally know what I'm talking about. It's all that beef and the fighting, and that wasn't what I was interested in. And the street art was seen as changed that now, I think, in most cases. And so I was exploring, instead of doing like a name, I was doing like an icon and an image, and that was Tangaroa in the Cook Island style. And I was doing that, and still some of my work reflects that. And so that was really like my curiosity, and I was sharing it and putting it on the street and trying to make people curious too. And I would draw my face, and I would give it wood grain, even though it might be a neon pink sticker, it had wood grain in it, and that was showing the links like to the land and to the environment. But who is this person? You know, and it's almost like, who am I? And I was going through that, and then it, you know, bump on a couple more years, and the opportunity to return back to the Cook Islands came to me. And I had a papa partner. We had a son, and my parents had the opportunity to give me a house in the Cook Islands, and they said, yeah, here it is, this opportunity. And I was just so hungry for it. My relationship wasn't great. The stress of trying to hold, you know, the mantle of being the man and all this shit was just so heavy on me. And I was just really crumpling under that. And meanwhile, that exacerbated between the relationship between my partner and I at that time. But I begged her and said, this was an opportunity. She had been there once. We moved back to the Cook Islands, and I tried to like really have a go at it. And I was like, yeah, I'm coming home. But I had all these ideas in my head of what I wanted. I did want to understand things through my culture, like total, like voyaging, were really the two things that it was really like, wow, this is an avenue. And knowing that our voyaging society was quite active, and they were doing a big sail at that time, which was the 7 canoes, Tamana, that went up to Hawaii and then back through the Pacific. And so, yeah, I was just hungry for it. And when I moved back, I met an old acquaintance, a friend of mine, and her partner did the hand tools. He did traditional total. He is Pakeha, his papa from England, but his teacher was, his lineage came down through the Siluape family. They passed the tools. It was when Siluape had shared with the wider Pacific with like people like Keone, and then there was a couple other teachers or students, and one of them was Inya Taylor, And so Inya had passed the tools to my friend's wife. And so they said, he's looking for a stretcher. And I was like, I didn't even know what that was until they explained it, basically. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm totally like super keen. Like, I'm there tomorrow. Let's do this. And so that really was the ability to kick off something that was an indigenous space. And I was super excited. And I learned so much in that time from my teacher, and I'm so grateful. And then she is also an artist as well. And so they just were nurturing me and loving me and feeding me and in all kinds of ways. And it was a safe space where we could talk about artifacts and the past and all those things. And they just nurtured me and loved me and all that. And then, but at that time, everything was starting to fall apart in my personal life. Even though I was like thriving in that space, my relationship was going right down with my partner at the time, and that all fell apart. She returned back to the Canada, and really on a low, like super, like ruined my life. Lost my partner and child at the time. Children, I should say, because we had a child while we were there, and then they went, and I did a bit of fighting in the court for them, and which I shouldn't have done, because that just made them tight, and everyone got tight, but that stemmed through the fear of my father losing his children when he was younger through his first marriage. So I was listening to them because I was lost, but once my partner left, that allowed me to just be. And I just started flourishing. I was creating heaps of artwork at that time, selling in the market, which my friends had a stall at our local market there that's quite famous in Rarotonga. And I started to learn how to sail, which I'd only done a little bit in my life, but I thought, if I want to learn that stuff, I better start getting on the water. So I was learning the basic skills of sailing, and then opportunities started coming. And then at that time, something really big happened, and that was so like I said, that big voyage of the 7 canoes had gone up to Hawaii, and then they'd gone over to America, and they had taken a break in San Diego, and they'd all flown home to have a break because I was like 8 months up, They left from Aotearoa, they went to Eastern Polynesia, Marquesas, and then up to you guys in Hilo and Hawaii, and then over. And so they needed it was a break around Christmas. And and then I just pushed to see if there was a possibility that I could join the voyage. I just worked towards that. They had these certain things that requirements. You're supposed to have 1,000 nautical miles. And I found out that there was a trader leaving from Rarotonga, going up to the Northern Group and coming back. They were going to get a tere party, which is a group of people, and bring them back. And so I jumped on. I asked actually, some people might know the sailing vessel. It's called the Kwai. I think they've just sold it, but it's based in Hawaii. But it comes down through the Kiribati, Cook Islands, and then it makes its way back up. And so I asked their kind of hippie captain and all Kiribati crew and some Americans. And I said, can I work my passage to have this? And he said, you can help load the hull. And if you do that well enough, then you can come with us. And so I worked a couple of days and helped load the hull. And then he said, yeah, you can come up. Meanwhile, in that time, I had met my future wife. She had come off the plane. I worked at the airport. And I was standing with her friend, and he's waiting for her. And I thought, oh, who's this? And vice versa. I learned later. And but when we talked, we realized we had a mutual friend. And so the way I acted to her was a lot different than say a stranger, because I know this person, and I'm going to continue to know this person. So I was honest and told her everything in regards to where I was in my life, and through my loss, but also where I was and what my goals were at that time. And so she was supportive of that. and that was, that was massive. And so here I was, I'm up in Puka Puka. My new friend at that time, who was my future wife, said, "Oh, I'd like to come back and visit." And I said, "Well, I don't know. I'm trying to go on this voyage." She knew, and I said, "Let me just ask the president of our voyaging society." And I just sent him a quick note on Messenger, and I said, "Oh, is this a possibility? Totally understand if it's not. Just want to know so I can make some future planning." He goes, "Actually, somebody just dropped out. You're on." And I was, "Oh, wow." And so this was just like straight into the deep end. So I'd returned back to the cook, back to Rarotonga on that sailing trader. And I was just, and that trip was so special in itself because this was the first time I'd gone to outer islands like that. And I got to be within a community and hosted, and then also the obligation of being hosted and not abusing that. So that was a really good wake up for what was to come. And then we flew over to San Diego to start the second half of that journey. And so that took us all the way. I got to sail for 8.5 months on the Cook Island Vaka, Maramaruatua. And that was just that was this little window, and boom, that was me pretty much shoved into culture. It was like, there's no other, that was it, and I know how well the Hawaiians hold the canoe, that you guys understand that it is a real honor and to have that opportunity. And so that really opened me up. But I didn't have much sailing skill, so it was quite useless at the beginning. And when you're doing long voyages, you don't practice anything. You set the course and you hold it, and that's what your job is. But the only skill I had was like a little bit of the skill that I'd learned in Raro, pattern making through my teacher, art making, making little necklaces and just the things that were really nurturing to me, healing. But now I had something that I could share, and I shared it with my crew, with some of the other crew off the other canoes, and then every once in a while I might be able to gift something to someone along the way, because so many people, the aloha is just dumped upon you when you arrive to these places, and you're never going to be able to repay them. But sometimes you can make a connection with people and share.
You mentioned a couple of things, and this last one is to make a connection. So it means that making a connection is just endemic to many of us. The need to make a connection, and when the connection is not made or it dismantles, it really, really affects us. So sometimes I meet people that they sort of convince themselves that they don't need to connect. And I come from a different world where connection is everything. And so the ability to make a connection, and that's one of the things that we have to do in academia. Because some things make immediate sense to us, and some things are so foreign. And why do we need to make a connection to that? How can that help me in my community? So that's a good question. And I like to think about you're saying earlier that your house was full of art that was not limited to just one people, but it connected to the world. So how did that collection of diversity contribute to your need to connect on varying levels? The other one you did say, which is huge, and it's a scary, scary question. It's so scary that I know a number of people that rather not ask the question, even if it means they get married 3 times. They rather not ask the question or get so many degrees. It's a difficult question to ask. Who am I? We are told who we are. We are told how to act, what not to act. No, we're conditioned. We receive a long genealogy. We have titles, we have roles, we have all of these, but behind all of the weight of community, there's sometimes a lonely person, a lost person that don't know themselves, and they just become they just become a shell of action. You know, there's something that's missing inside. And who am I? That's a hard question, and that's a question one doesn't ask just once in their life. You know, at the point you're 15 years old and you're growing out of, you're growing into your body. At that time it's really the hormones are all, or you know, your body, the chemicals are all just array. And then your family, you know, they're going one direction, you're going in one direction. So who am I at age 15? And then, you know, you're moving from one community to another. Who am I in that context? Your need, and then there's that big 911 that causes you to go home, and your parents are desperately wanting you to come home. And who am I in that context? You know, there's a question: who am I? Who am I? Who am I? It's an interesting question because the artists that I know, and it ain't very much because I don't really identify as an artist, but I have been becoming affiliated with a number of them. They seem they seem to always ask that question: who am I? How is this representative of me? How is this art me? How am I this art? It's a difficult thing to them just to make something and just get rid of it. There's always a sense of me being in it. So, you know, the other thing you mentioned is safe place. I was lost. And then when you were at the bottom, when you couldn't get lost anymore, you lost your partner and your child, you began to sail, you know. So I'm looking at all of these phrases and these words, and they're very, very familiar to myself and to a number of people. I'm looking at their names on this platform, but it's also one of those things that people are willing to leave behind when they enter into a university system. You know, they just sort of, they think they can leave all of that behind and just go get the degree. Some can, many in my world cannot. Somehow that has to be unpacked. That baggage got to be unpacked. And especially you talk about it being on a canoe, you can't put everything on a canoe. That's a great thing about being on a canoe is you always live in the field of priority. What do I need now? What is needed from this leg to that leg? What do I take off the canoe? What do I put in? What do I replace? Your art was, now you don't have big spaces for murals. It come down to little you know, little things that you could do, take up a little bit space, but it had a high impact on connection. So you had to prioritize that. Now, the who am I? And we're going to be sharing some of his images quite soon. So I want, if you have questions, please put it in the chat. This is your time to inquire into the human. We want to celebrate the human behind the art, the human story. So, you know, if you have any questions, you need any clarifications, you have any words of encouragement or kind ridicule, support, whatever you call it.
I'm strong enough. I'm strong enough. It's okay.
But who are you?
Yeah. Who am I? Like I said, I'm a father, partner. I believe I'm a strong part of my community. I'm trying to be a stronger part of my community and what those mean, because your community has expectations of you. And so it's about meeting those expectations, but also not to the point where it's detrimental to yourself. And finding my place, because here I am in Aotearoa, and so I'm kind of been dabbling and trying to find my place here. You know, move forward. I returned from the canoes. You know, the voyage had ended up 8.5 months. I ended up in Solomon Islands. Our return began back to our home islands, but my passport was starting to run out, and I couldn't update it in Fiji, so the option was that I had to fly out, and so I did, and then when I hit the Auckland airport on my transit, I called my partner and said, and we'd kept in connection through that time, and I said, I'm in the airport. Should I get on the next plane or stay here? And she said, stay. So I did. So I stayed, and right away I moved into her place, and but I was so isolated at that time. I'd come off a voyage where I was with 100 strong, and then I was kind of like by myself with someone who I knew, still building a bond with, and then we made our path, and I'd returned home. I said, okay, I'm gonna go home and pack up, and then move back. Where this is, I'd stayed a bit of time and realized, no, this is, I do want to be with you, and this was, my next direction, I guess, and so I did that, and then I moved to Aotearoa, and it's been a real blessing because I was content in Rarotonga, but the nurturing and the connection and the people here, which has taken me a long time to learn and to build, I think mostly geographically because of the way Auckland is laid out. Tamaki Makaurau is quite a big city. I put it to like more like LA. It's really spread out. But the amount of communities here, like if you want a knowledge holder, you can find one in this city, because I think the only city that is on par with it in regards to it being a great Polynesian city is Honolulu. It's the only place I've ever felt that there's a similarity of the amount of Polynesians in one place, or people of the Pacific, and and I am so lucky because I've had many people nurture me and look after me and support me. I have to mention, like I said, my brother Croc, who I was with, Annie O'Neill, and my sister Rosanna Raymond, who some might know, and they're a generation before me, but they're in that same place of being part traditional and part diaspora, but with a greater knowledge of it, where I was really like, didn't have a clue because I'd never been around Pacific people. So they've been, them and many other people had nurtured me. And then I was kind of thrown in the deep end in regards to the Māori culture with my wife. And another, again, my wife nurturing me and protecting me and not letting me learn the hard way, I guess you could say. So
Yeah,
this place is so good to me.
wives can do that. Wives have
Yeah,
an ability to keep their husbands from learning the hard way or
yeah.
learning the hard way.
Hey, like I said, you always have to be able to listen, right? If
Yeah.
you can listen, then you can learn a lot more.
Um, you use the term, I mean, you just your phrases and the terms that you use, it just ring bells. Knowledge holder. If you're looking for a knowledge holder, you're able to find one. Can I ask a question? How are you a knowledge holder? What knowledge do you hold? If you have this bratty kid in your neighborhood that's just not listening to anyone and just wanting to do their own, and I'm not this, I'm hoping I'm not describing you, but they just have a special call and nobody's hearing that call. They have a special need, and that person shows up at your door. You don't, and oftentimes in that case, people don't know what they're looking for. They've been neglected for such a long time that they don't have words for their feelings anymore. It's just they're acting out. What one day that child will show up at your door, or have what knowledge? How will you be that knowledge holder? What kind of knowledge will you hold for that child coming to your door, given
Yeah,
your experience?
yeah. Like I said, I've been really blessed. I mean, I can say that I am a knowledge holder, and that's something I've had to come to like terms with, to say that, because we know the tohungas, and we know the kohunas and all those people that are the real deal. They've been doing it for generation, or not generations, for decades, and carrying their lineage of their knowledge. But for me, I can share. Yeah, I guess that's really what I'm coming to terms now. I am a knowledge holder, but to define that is really difficult. Like I know how to work on the canoe. I can sail properly now. And actually took me time here in Aotearoa to continue sailing, because when you do sailing where it's a day sail and you have to tack 5 times, unlike a voyage, and you set the tack, and you might tack once before you get to your destination, which might be 10 days away. You don't learn much. But when you do day sailing in a harbor, and our harbor is one of the most busiest ones, and this definitely in this country, and so I learned a lot more. So I can proudly say that I know how to sail the canoe. But even though I've stepped away from it, I can step to it as well. I know how to paint. I know how to paint large scale murals. These are the things you don't realize you know until you have to teach someone, and then you go,
exactly.
"Oh my God, I know this now," and they don't. Like,
So this
I
was
know
a
how
trick
to.
question. It was a trick question, really, because you never know what you know
Yeah,
until a person needs it from you, or a
yeah,
community needs it
yes,
from you. My
yeah.
son moved to New York. He woke up one day and he says, "Okay, I'm going to become a fashion." He wants to go to fashion school. He already has multiple degrees here in Hilo, academic degrees, and I said, "Kawila, there's no indication that you're leaning toward the fashion, based on what his choice of clothing. I'm just a sarcastic father, but we're going to support you." So he goes to New York, way out of the other side of the world, and we don't know how to support him there, but we do our best. And then he goes through that life there, and then the community, talk about the Hokulea, was coming to New York, and the community looked around to see who has the knowledge to hold the ceremonies. And he's in his early 20s. He's the youngest kid. He never had to make decisions in his life. Decisions were made way before the questions were formed. And he calls us up one day. He goes, "Mom, Dad, they're asking me to do these ceremonies, and I only know how to be in ceremonies. I don't know how to design ceremonies. Help me." So he says, "Kawila, everything you need to know is in your experience space." And he goes, "So that means you're not helping me?" No. What that means is you need to stop asking questions and really look inside. Ask the questions internally of yourself, and you'll have exactly what you need to do to take the next step with your community. And lo and behold, it was a success. He never knew it was a success. We never, he never saw it in himself, but his community did. And when he realized that his family's been training him for that very moment in his life, that was the reason why he was born, or that moment in that life, he was trained. So it is indeed a trick question. What knowledge do you hold? You never know until somebody comes and they need something from you. I would like to segue. Wait, there's a good question. Okay, if I can go over here. So somebody says, "Thank you for sharing what you did, because it does take a lot of courage." And this is what we're bringing into the university system. We're bringing back storytelling into the university system. We put a lot of attention on literacy, writing, reading, thinking, logical. But we've been telling story much longer than we've been scholarshiping. Scholarship to the human experience is a new sensation. We've been telling stories since we've descended from the stars. That's how we've connected. That's how we've dreamed. That's how we've been able to enter into that cycle. So thank you for sharing your story. We're bringing storytelling back into academia, because we got to pay all that tuition to learn from all these strangers, and we don't know where they're from, who their name, what's their bigger story. Why are you here in this class? What gives you the right to teach me? And and really building that connection to honor not just the person's academic credentials, honoring the person's story. And who cares if that person is indigenous or not? They all have a story, and we all can learn from each other. So thank you for sharing your story, and we just need to share more stories. Someone by the name of Nate, to everyone, says, "I can relate to the struggling to find where you fit in. If you wouldn't mind this question, do you feel like you found where you belong, your place, as you're not out settled? Is it ever evolving? Do you feel safe navigating different spaces?"
Oh, great question. I'm starting to feel settled now, and it's always evolving. new seasons bring new things and new people and new situations. And yeah, and I do feel safe navigating different spaces, but that's because I'm built my community that I can, and that I kind of understand the structure as long as I'm not offending people. Um, and I think we're in a really interesting place right now because I'm really interested in like not losing what we have separately, but what is connecting us as Te Moana Nui Akiva, because right now we're in that, because we're in the diaspora kind of space, we're looking at each other and it's like our communities are strong, like, oh, Samoan community strong, Tongan community, but then there's no interaction. Everyone's just doing their thing and they're siloing themselves, and the next generation's coming up and they don't want to be siloed. And also when we're looking for, let's say, your tribe, and you realize, oh, these things matter to me, but they don't matter to my community. But then all of a sudden you start building your community through those caring, I guess, or want or need, just as I did. What's great is that like young people now, if they want, because of things like social media and connection, it's so much easier. If they want to find really obscure and abstract themes and directions, it's easy to find them. So if you want to know someone who likes this, and this, you can find that person, and it might accidentally happen just by you conversating in social media laughing at the same meme, or on the same, reading the same papers, or going to the same march over the same issue, fighting for land, all these things. We're seeing young people connect in a whole faster, quicker way than we ever did. And it's kind of boggling us, but it's exciting at the same time. So yeah, I do feel safe, like, yeah, because I guess I'm secure in myself and I know how to act. And I think that goes beyond just like, I think that's a good general thing. If you know how to hold yourself and carry yourself and know who you are, it's easier to take that into the world and bounce in other people's. Because what happens, we get in our bubble and then you meet someone and they burst your bubble. And that can be accidentally, intentionally, with malice, or with love. They're trying to get close to you, or they're breaking the bubble. And that's something I've really noticed in the last couple of years. And so if you know who you are and how you carry yourself, I am extremely lucky because of my connection to my wife, because her and her whānau and her iwi hold the mana of the city we live in, so I get to, sit on the side of that. That's my children's whakapapa, and that's my goal, is to upskill myself so I can stand next to them, and so I'm allowed to be in that space through the love of her family in iwi, and they know that I love her, and so it's easy for them to love me in return. And maybe if it comes to the point that I make a mistake, it'll be forgiven as well because of that love. Luckily, I haven't made any super faux pas, but yeah, in that interaction, I'm surrounded by creatives. All my friends are artists, Pacific artists, Maori artists, and otherwise, and so there's a community that I'm a part of, and I've grown that through being here. So I feel real lucky, and now I'm holding space through some of my interactions, and I guess we could talk through that through some of my artwork. Now we're kind of getting caught up.
Yeah, the integration of an experience, that's huge. Many of our students that do make it through to graduation, and many of them do, sometimes the difficulty is having to go back to their little village, their little rural part of the world. And how do you live after swimming in such a big swimming pool, the university? You get exposed to the world, and your biases are not the same as when you first entered the experience. How do you integrate those biases without offending community? And that's the beautiful dance that we have. It's a beautiful dance because, as you say, know yourself and be confident, but know enough that you can adjust under conditions, because you mentioned it a couple of times. You don't like to offend community.
Mm.
And nobody needs to offend community if you know yourself in plural ways. There's
Mhm.
and in hula, and hula is our world. We learn to dance many kinds of dances because a situation may require a particular kind of dance and not another. So if we only know how to dance one dance, we're kind of limited how far we can connect with the community. And so we can sure relate to that. We're going to be pulling up some images. And so we have our magic person behind here. His name is Noel.
I wanted to I wanted to mention one more thing too, though, is that I also come off um, to something I've forgotten in regards to the kind of mana that I brought, because I came here off of the canoe, and same with returning back to the islands, is that I realized that I hold my own mana now. Nobody can take that away from me, not even in the other people that I sailed with, which on occasion you get people you clash with, and through my experience, I knew nobody could take that away from me. And so I can stand in myself there. It's like, I know there's only a few people that can say they sailed from San Diego to Solomon on a traditional hull canoe, and so even though I wasn't navigator and all that, I did that experience, and I held myself in that place. And so I can always reflect back to that, like if I, because you will get challenged. You get challenged on who you are and what you do and the way you do it. And I have to be ready for that. But I know that no one can take that away from me. Mm.
Well said. I can
Sorry,
stand
continue.
in,
I just
I can stand in
popped in the head.
myself. I can
Yeah.
stand in myself. Wow. Our children need to hear that.
Yeah.
We got to begin letting them know that the day will come when you'll need to stand in yourself.
Mm.
Because if it, it's, we, yeah, you can get very busy and professional and very successful and not be standing in yourself, and your mana is in the grip of somebody else. So, with that said, image number one, behind curtain number one.
Okay, let's see what did I share? What did I share?
Okay,
Okay, so
tell
this
us.
is a piece that I painted at Tituhi, which is a regional art space in this, and it was a mural wall. This is actually a letter style that I created out of the Marquesian tattooing patterns from the 1800s. And if you can read it, I'm sure you can read it. It's very legible, and it reads mana. And I created this artwork, a woodblock series of the letters, and this was me sharing the letters in a new way, because the woodblock show it didn't go very far. I didn't push it really hard. It was a really new thing to me, was woodblock at the time, and this was a way to share. And then also in the bottom corner under the last A, you can see there's 3 triangles, and they spell out a name, and that is Emma, and that was my Samoan sister. She had just passed that week of cancer, and she was a very strong person in our community, in our sailing community, and she trained generations of kids on the canoe, who are now the leaders of the canoe. And so that piece means a lot to me. The work is called Faux Patutiki. Patutiki is what they call in the Marquesas. That's what they call it. It's cacao. It's tatao. They call it patutiki. And so faux is the French word for fake. So it's the French patutiki. So I figured out how to make this style, and I wanted it to be in the title because I wanted it very clear. I did not want people to be confused with this being the actual patterning, because those structures were made by them, for them, in their way, and I don't know what that way is. And unfortunately, due to time, I don't know if a lot is. And it stemmed from the stories of, in the early 90s, because this book was, I'm trying to think if I can find it real quickly on my shelf. They shared the images, and it was kind of broken down into pieces, A, B, like this section is section A, and this section is section B. And in the early 90s, when the Tahitians were reviving their tattooing and taking a lot of this patterning, they would go, oh, I can write your name in ancient Tahitian, because there was this letter spell at the bottom, so they could piece it all together and say, and some people would say, oh, I've got my name in ancient Tahitian on me, in the early 90s, and that was the tattooists, they were having fun with it, obviously, knowing that there's no written language for our people. So it's playing on that, but also a way to share a style that I love, which is the Marquesan style.
Behind curtain number 2.
Here's me stretching with my my friend, my brother, my teacher, who's unfortunately passed this year. His name was Croc, and like I said, he learned the tools which were passed down to him, and he was super respectful. And I thought of my brother as the reverse colonization, because he cared more about our traditional arts than a lot of Cook Islanders did, and Polynesian people did. And we're working on another great friend of ours. His name was Ian George. He was quite well-known Cook Island artist, and he died a few years ago as well. So this picture means a lot. We actually did this. This was a structure. This was at the PAA that was held in Rarotonga in 2010, I believe. And so, yeah, just showing that, here I was, not knowing much, but quite happy to be a part of it and be amongst it. And, and that the act of being on the mat and doing things that our ancestors have done, like voyaging, like getting traditional tatal, like drinking kava, all these things are, when you walk in the footsteps of your ancestors, you learn so much. When you sit on the mat and you hear the sound of the rako hitting the tool, the awl, you learn so much, and that's defined so much for me.
So this image is quite sobering, because nobody ever thinks about passing. It's not our frontline conversation. It's an uncomfortable discussion to have. But here you are. There's, of the 3, there's one that's living in the physical, and the other 2, they're living in memory and or in the arts or in the knowledge that they shared. So they're still living, very much.
Most definitely.
But it gives us, I worked at a care home for 10 years while I was putting myself through college, and that was my job, because I was dealing with the life cycle every day. Every night, I worked at night shift. Every night that I went, I was dealing with people that are sick or dying, or had to be prepared for the mortuary person to pick up. And so one part of myself is very jubilant and very, I'm like a forest sprite. I see a lot of magic everywhere. But there's another part of me that's very sobering, that I better live now and live well and make the best decisions. And if I make a decision that wasn't good, don't make that same one again. I don't want to waste time. I want to enjoy it. But also, there's no day that everybody want to call you a master. That doesn't matter if you're a master. What matters is, do you have something today? Do you have a knowledge you can share with someone else today? Start sharing that knowledge. And that's exactly what's going on. Now, 2010, you mentioned, was it a festival? You talked about festival?
The PAA was what does it stand for again? It's basically an academics arts, Pacific arts. What's the P stand for? But it's mostly academic driven, but now artists are starting to come into that space as well. And like I said, in the past, we know that most of them were European and things like that. And but they hold it every year. They hold one up usually in Europe, and then they hold one down in the Southern Hemisphere, one in the Northern Hemisphere, and one in the Southern Hemisphere.
Okay,
Great
great.
opportunity. It's where I met a lot of amazing people. Uh, as I've gone to a few more since then, but that was my first one.
And behind door number 3.
Oh,
What's going on?
okay. What is this? This picture is of, so I've created my own indigenous holiday, which I'd love you all to celebrate. And it's called Cook the Captain Day. It's celebrated on February 14th. And guess why? So my idea was that, you know, your ancestors gave us a great reason to celebrate, and that was they took the life of Captain Cook. Because what happened in the year last year here is they celebrated 250 years of Captain Cook finding Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so they had there's a replica in Australia, and they brought it over and they sailed it, circumnavigated New Zealand to share in the glory of that. So this was kind of a pushback of, well, if we can celebrate his life, then we can celebrate his death, right? Because what happens here is people say, oh, that was in the past, get over it, you know? And so for me, it's like, yeah, okay, well, we're celebrating, and you can, you know, if you don't like it, then, you know, you just got to accept it and you just got to get over it. And it's just a bit of a pushback in regards to it. And this year I celebrated it again. And so this was at the finish. We cooked a pig over those coals, and we had everyone bring I asked them to bring a traditional kai from where they're from, or something that means something to them. We had the most beautiful interaction. And so I made a giant ship of cardboard, and you can see it burning here. And what I'd asked is that during the night is if people could write either a note to him or to their ancestors, you know, of the past, and then this would be the effigy, and we would light it up at the end. And so this was kind of the kind of crescendo at the end of the night as we lit it up per se. And so yeah, we do celebrate this. It's the second year we celebrated it this year, and looking forward to celebrating it more. I'd like to grow it. The idea too is that to connect, we all have a colonizer. It doesn't matter if they were Cook or Cortez or Columbus or any of those other seaward fellas, we all had one. And so that is a way for, because what happens is that we get separated by our struggle and by our pain. And this way of celebrating our indigeneity and being happy in our space, and not being it a Samoan thing, a Tongan, a Hawaiian thing, a First Nations thing, South American Native thing. We can all celebrate at this time in this way. And that's my goal right now, is to grow the holiday into a bigger thing. So,
you know,
yeah,
that is one of the variables that sometimes hold some of our people back in academia. I'm only speaking within the context of academia, is that sometimes they're born of conflict. You know, their ancestors are both the native and the colonizer, and it's in their body. It's actually in their body, and then it's conditioned through the American school system, you know, where one person's narrative is, you know, has the front line, is the diva of it all, and you don't hear the other narratives. And so, you know, one of the things that we have to do is, and we help our students is, you know, to overcome, is how to find peace within their own biology, the narrative of their own story. Because there's huge conflict. My wife is interesting because, you know, she's very much Hawaiian and descends from a very concentrated line of it, but then she also has some white in her, and not just any kind, but some of those colonizers. So, you know, sometimes she finds herself in this little intersection, and she has to figure out what narrative is going to get her to the next point, and that there's always multiple views behind an incident. And I guess what this ceremony is about is, don't lose your view to another person's narrative. Hold your narrative forward, and then also change perhaps how you relate to that narrative.
Definitely.
By creating, instead of being damaged by it, how can you now make it your strength?
Yes.
You know,
How do we pivot
uh,
off of it? You know, that's
yeah,
the catchword right now, pivot. But yeah, taking that pain and turning it into a celebration. That's really the exciting part for me, is going, we've all feel that pain, and I think our younger people are tuning into it more now because it's not being whitewashed or covered up or, you know, all that stuff. So
yeah, all
yeah.
the narratives are coming forward.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Next image.
Oh, there's the
Oh,
ship itself. So that's it in its full glory there. And so, like I said, we had pens there, and everybody wrote on it. And in the night we were, drinking kava, celebrating, music playing. It was beautiful. It's February for us. That's summer, height of summer. Everyone was having a great time.
it's something that fire in the night does to someone's spirit. It's different when fire is just during the day. But some of the things that we had to create is how to communicate in different ways to the people in our body. And one of them is, we've created the simple ceremonies. I wouldn't even call it a ceremony. It's just a special moment where we make a little fire, and we give sometimes our students, our hula students or college students, a little origami or little sheets of paper, and they can, write a little message to someone, thank them, or just have a conversation using the written word, fold it up, nobody will ever know about it, and throw it into the flame and let the fire take it where it needs to go. And how cathartic that is. It really gives people a piece of knowing that
Mm.
they had some say in their story and they're able to communicate. If they can't chant or they can't dance and all they can do is write and think, then why not use that to communicate? And that they do it, but we throw it into the fire. For some reason, there's some safety when our thoughts go into the fire. Do we have one more image?
Okay. Yeah, let's do this. Oh, let's move on. This is the stencil I made to make the t-shirt. So let's jump to the next one because that's just a very simple one. So this is my most recent mural that I worked on. This is Educate to Liberate. This is so here in Aotearoa, we are celebrating the 50 years of the Polynesian Panthers, which was reflecting directly from the original Black Panther Party from America, and which are the two parties have met and have connected. And so this work is a reflection of that, telling some of the storylines in Aotearoa and in America. On the left is all of Emory Douglas's artwork, who is the original Minister of Culture and Arts for the Black Panther Party, and is still a strong force in the Bay Area. And he was supposed to come to Aotearoa to help us paint this mural, but unfortunately, due to COVID, he couldn't. So we painted it for him. And then there's myself, Toa, Chris McBride, and Huriana, we all contributed to the works to speak to different stories. And it took about 3 weeks to paint. It was the end of our summer. It was quite hot. It was quite a push because I was the only actual mural artist out of us four. So that meant I had to, begrudgingly be a little more of a leader when I wasn't really expecting it. But we got there, and we're super proud. The honor is all ours to represent for our community. A piece like this. This is a first in New Zealand to have a work like this. And if you can see on the side there, it says "Once a Panther, always a Panther." And if you're wondering where it is, Joy, it is on the corner of K Road and Gundry up in town, and that was an area in which the Panthers, stomped around in, because back in the day, which is a gentrified area now, is that area, but in the old, in the 70s and 80s, that was the brown communities, and that's where. So we had the same situation. We had people rolling up on brown people and checking their ID, roughing them up, beating them up, and then spitting them out and all that. And so the Panthers grew out of that movement, similar to to the Black Panthers, educating people. You know, as we know, history is told they've got a lot of bad rap. Ours weren't as violent as the American version, but that's because we're not as violent here in Aotearoa due to our police are, they don't carry guns here on the regular, and that's the difference. But still, the violence was still there, just not in the same way. So this has just been a real, to have people come out of the community and thank us for this opportunity and for representing them in their neighborhoods. And just, it's like across the road from this place is the Tesla, where you go to buy a Tesla in Auckland. It's just a complete contrast to what it used to be, and so for the people that still live it, and K Road is probably the closest thing to maybe like Haight-Ashbury. It's still where all the kind of freaks and the all what were considered the freaks, but where all the funky people go, and where all the gay bars are, and where all the where all the safe spaces are for the people in the city that maybe not feel safe anywhere else. So what this means for them, and for and like you say, our communities are so humble that they don't tell their stories, and we need to do that. Yeah. So it's been so humbling to do this project, because it's greater than my work. I just, like, my contribution is like there's 21 characters on this piece, and I did 2 of them, and I was just like, yeah, I don't care what, I'm not, this is not my story, I'm just here to help tell the story. So it's a great honor.
Yeah. A couple of things that the Islanders who share stories like Maui, share stories like Pele, and and we have the stories of Kane and Kanaloa, known as Tangaroa and Tane. We share these across the ocean, but no one of us has the complete story. We all have elements of this story. We all kept certain chapters of that story, and that story was never meant to be owned by one person. We learned that. My wife and I learned that when we went to the Marquesas, and we grew up in a world where Pele is in Hawaii, and we're very literate in all things Pele, all things as relates to the family. We already knew that different families in Hawaii had different chapters to the story, but we sort of had the understanding that Pele was very much Hawaiian. And when we went down to the south, we were kind of reminded that we own a few chapters of her. Others, and how humbling, but yet how liberating that was. In the case that we would forget, or we need to remember that there's someone else out there that had the storyline, and that it reminded us that the colonization may have partitioned the ocean, but our stories are telling us that our ocean is not partitioned. We all own different aspects of it, and so that's a great reminder. And it's quite humbling, but it's also an honor to know that we hold a few chapters. And if you have some missing chapters, well, the chances are we might have them. And in my case, I've studied this one long chant, 200 lines, for a good part of my hula years. But there were some really esoteric things I could never understand. And I got to understand what they meant when I went to the Marquesas, and they're in Patuiva. They had missing pieces of the puzzle that completed, what I needed to know. So this is a great thing that you say that, this is the story of that community, and everybody has a piece of that story, and your ability to contribute to the emergence and the presence of that story, so it doesn't get lost next to Tesla or other things like that. I think we have one more image. Oh, so who is this? Who is this guy? Tell us about him.
This was last year. This was me hosting. We'd taken the Marumaru Atu out for a sale. you know, every time I get a chance to go back and sail with the our Mama Vaca, I do. And I just asked if we could hold a kava session on the canoe, which is not, the Cook Islands do not have the tradition of kava anymore. And so it's still kind of just a touchy space, you know, but it was allowed, and we came together, and this was actually when a lot of the stuff was going on Mauna Kea, and I wanted to bring us all together, and to talk about that, and talk about, you know, because Indigenous rights is like it's funny when you go back to the island, it's quite a scary thing for them to fight for. And right, what I wanted to link Mauna Kea to for us is that they are fighting for our water rights. The government has just shifted everything, redone the water, and they basically taken power of it, where it used to be the families that used to look after, that lived in each valley. And so I was trying to say, hey, let's, you know, I was trying to parallel them, like, here we are, let's show our love for our ohana up in Hawaii, but also talk about where we're sitting in this space right now. So yeah, and that was our crew for the day. And so for some of them, it was their first time having kava, you know, and it's only been a couple of years of me drinking and getting to the point where I was comfortable enough to go and say, hey, can we mix for our, you know, that I could mix for our crew, and re-indigenizing it and connecting it back to the canoe, you know, because you know, people look at kava as alcohol, and it's nothing like that. It's something that's like one of those things. It's healing. When you walk in the footsteps or do something of your ancestors, it's a healing practice.
You know, the great thing about, and I haven't lived anywhere else in the world. I've only lived in Hawaii. I visited a number of places, but I've only lived in Hawaii. And what I do know is that sometimes when we forgot something because we gave it up, or maybe it went to sleep and it's in coma, we need a little bit, you know, we got to revive it. You know, right. Such as the kapa, when you know, there's a time when we didn't have the need to make kapa, and then the time came when we needed to make kapa. Well, we went to the south. Many of our people went to the south to relearn kapa. We whatever we remembered, we brought together, and then we went to the cousins in the south to go and pick up the rest of the things that we needed to learn and then adapt to us. The same thing with Tatao, when the school of tattoo was awakening, was coming out of the sleep. You know, we had some of our information in books, and you know, and in families. Families had a lot of information, but that didn't stop us from going to Samoa and other places to also learn. So, you know, I think when we begin to think that we are onto ourselves, and we really begin to get egotistical ethnically in that way, that could be quite dangerous, because then that could limit our memory. But if we begin to connect beyond the limits that colonization has put upon the islands and the families, then we can actually say we've forgotten nothing. As an island nation, nobody's forgotten anything, because we all hold each other. We all hold something. So with that said, Numa, I would really love to serve you ava one day, you and your family, however you define that. We have a very interesting ava ceremony that we do that is very hula based. And so, you know, the drink is the ava, but how you present that cup and who you call to be present in that space has a lot to do with the culture that's hosting it. So I'd really love to have that opportunity to sit at the kanoa and serve you and your family ava. And huge mahalo for all the work that you do. I do know that at times it gets lonely when one starts thinking of things and we have to be very careful. Timing is important. You can have the best thought, but if it comes out at the wrong time in the wrong space, it could also be very detrimental. So I pray that your creative genius, your deity, whether one or many, be close, and and be kind and give you what you need. And also that the children in your community get to know you, um, and because you hold a particular part of their story. And the part of the university, you know, we can learn from anyone and anything. We just have to indigenize the learning, meaning we have to control what we learn and how we learn and the volume that we learn and how we deliver that, how we integrate that learning. We need to, like your waterways, it cannot be governed by an outside. It has to be governed from within. That's the Mauna Kea that we're fighting for, the inner, the outer as well as the inner Mauna Kea. And so, you know, if anything, Numa has shared his story. Some of you don't see yourselves as artists, but if you're a parent, guess what? You're an artist. The art you have to bring into parenting. You know, if you're an auntie or an uncle, be keep your eyes open because there's going to be that child that's going to need you, a child that's going to need support. We don't come from a culture where the duty of the parent, you know, the duty to raise a child is just the sole arena of the nuclear parents, but it's a community. So contribute to the well-being of your community. If you're in the university system, bring your stories to the university system. We like data, we like fact, but we'd rather have stories. And bring your human story. People need to know that there are human beings within this profession of transformation. You know, teach our students to ask respectfully of our teachers, who are you? Where are you from? Why are you teaching us here? Why do you like teaching psychology? You know, and ask that question. Because if you're going to pay tuition for that person to play around with your brain, you better know who's playing around with your brain. You should know the genealogy. You know, our students we need everyone to succeed in higher education. Because if higher education is only the success of one or two ethnicities, then they will be making the decisions for our little islands. And that needs to stop. We need to have our people. I mean, we don't, and again, if you're thinking that by becoming indigenous, meaning we don't like anybody else, then you really cannot get off of that storyline because that's not it. By being indigenous is knowing where we stand. And it's an invitation also, if you live here in Hawaii, indigenize your thinking processes to the waterways, to the natural phenomena of this space. It's called adapt, it's called acclimate. It's the law of biology. If we live in Aotearoa, we'll definitely have to adapt there. If we live somewhere else in the part of the world, we don't put up our picket fence. We begin to adapt within that community and support and learn their songs and sing when invited to sing. So, ladies and gentlemen, especially to our cousin Numa, I want to say thank you. This is a great time. I never thought as a child, I've always loved storytelling. I love being with my grandparents. They were my safe space. Nobody outside of my grandparents understood me. I had to be very careful how I presented myself outside of my grandparents. And when they were no longer there, it was a really, really lonely world. But storytelling in all its forms, whether formal ka'au or mo'olelo historical stories or just vala'au talk stories, they've always allowed me to connect. And I found that one of the best tools we have to connect our students to their own success and their own story and getting them beyond the fear of succeeding is through storytelling. If they know other people walk the walk, they will walk it. Or they will get on a canoe and they will do it. So Numa, to you and your ohana he aloha nui. I hope something tell us we'll be in close quarters. And thank you again for participating. We hope you got to share what you wanted to share. Too bad if you didn't want to share anything and it came out of your mouth, you can't take it back. It's ours. To those of you that spend your evenings with us or your afternoon, thank you. Thank you for just celebrating the story of our cousin Numa. But thank yourselves. Write yourself a little note. Say thank you. Throw it into the fire. Nobody will ever know you're thanking yourself, but thank yourself. And don't be afraid of challenges. turn those challenges into your powerhouse. You know, that's the only way we're going to survive. Ahui ho no kako. Thank you for biting the hook of Maui. We all got hooked up in this, and it's a good thing. This is a good hook to bite. So thank you, Ahui ho no. Numa, if you can stay on just for a little bit, together with our tech crew. But next week, what is our next commercial? Can somebody do a commercial for next week? What's going on next week? Yeah,
I think it's our Yapana cousins.
Okay, is that a Sunday? Is that a Sunday presentation?
Yes.
What date is that on a Sunday? So we're gonna have a Mōkaulele on a Sunday, and this is to accommodate the Tyra family. I believe it's a Tyra family we're doing.
Yes, on the 18th.
On the 18th, and so please check your flyer on FB. They'll be sharing with us their waking out of sleep, their banana fiber, their indigenous fiberware, and how only a few elders remembered how to do it, and now it's come out and it's becoming the metaphor of a nation, an indigenous nation rising. And so and the matriarch of this practice, she's like 100 and something years old, so like, whoa. It will be conducted in Japanese with an English translator, so isn't that interesting? So do join us. We'll get you that information. And okay, good night. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you so much.